welcome to Thriving Thursday. If this is your first time here, I am Sara de la Cruz. I am your host and welcome here. We like to talk a little bit about everything. We keep it faith-related, faith-based content, and we have a very fun and good time. And yeah, I hope you get to unplug and that the Holy Spirit's able to move. Here with me today, here with us today, I have a
Hello.
special guest, Sara, with
Hello,
me.
everybody.
Sarah is a really cool girl that I met actually not even too long ago.
Yeah,
Like it's
just recently.
been like what?
I
Like
think a couple
maybe
months.
half a
Yeah.
year?
No, I don't.
Like
Time has gone by
well,
pretty
because I met
fast,
you like right
so
after I got married and it's been 6 months since I got
yeah.
married.
So
So
yeah,
like five
that's
almost half a
crazy.
year
Yeah,
already.
half a year.
Eh,
Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah, I don't even know who invited you to the Bible
Well,
study.
I think it's because whoa. We're already getting into this. Dang, that's crazy. Well, I actually went to a church before that, and we were going to that church for like 7, 8 years, I think. And then eventually, we just kind of didn't align with that church anymore, and so my parents took a step of faith, and
Eh,
they decided, you know what? Like, I feel like this church isn't really I get not really not necessarily good for us, but I feel like we were just kind of transitioning into a
mm,
different part of our life that wasn't really aligning with that church.
uh-huh.
And so it was actually Abby's parents who invited us to church and were like, "Hey, like y'all should come to
What?
church with us," because I think my dad and her dad knew each other because my
Oh.
dad is like a mechanic. He helps people fix their
Okay,
cars.
yeah.
And so I guess he had invited my dad, and so we just went. And immediately, it's like the Lord just knew where to place us exactly.
That's
Like, and it's crazy to
crazy.
think that it was the first church that we try to go to, and then like here we are. We kind of
That's
stuck around, you know?
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow. I didn't even know that. But yeah, I was like thinking about it. I'm like, wait, who even
yeah.
invited her
No,
there?
yeah,
But yeah, you
and
showed up
then
at the
like
Bible
after
study and I
that,
met you there.
yeah, and then after that, Stephanie was telling me about how they had Thursdays. And like at the time, I don't know if you remember, I was the only one going. Like it was just me. And so obviously it was a huge
Yeah.
transition because the church that I had went to before had tried doing activities with like the youth, but it
Uh-huh.
never really worked out. And then whenever we did do stuff, it just never really ended up going anywhere. And like
Mm-hmm.
there were times where we had like our own youth, I guess, but then eventually they would cancel a week and then it just never really picked back up again. And then
Mm.
like they would try it again and it just never really worked out. But then again, like I kind of understand why I didn't because at the time the youth wasn't really, I guess, striving for anything. We were
Okay.
kind of all
Yeah.
just like, we all just come to church, you
Like going
know?
through the
Yeah,
motions,
yeah. Because I
basically.
feel like at that point, it was kind of just a routine of going to church and not really
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, like I want to go to church to seek the
Yeah, I
Lord,
feel
you
like a
know?
lot of times, like the kids or like teenagers, like they only go to church because like their parents go, so
Yeah,
they're like,
especially when you
"I'm
grow
here."
up going to church.
Yeah,
It's like I don't really have a say in whether or
yeah,
not I come or not. So it literally feels like a routine and you just feel like, "Oh, well it's Sunday again. Here I go," you know? And
yeah.
so then like I now looking back on it, like I don't blame them at all for it not working. Like obviously it can't work if we're not sitting there like encouraging them or kind of like putting in our part. So like
Mm-hmm.
I understand why it didn't really work out, which like now looking back on it is like the Lord was still working through all of that. We were all going through our own stuff, but yeah, I started going to the youths, and at first it was just me, and for the longest, I was praying that like my brother would start going. And just recently, he started coming to all the youths
Hey,
and
shout out
got involved with
Isaac.
yeah, shout out my brother Isaac. But yeah, he started getting involved with everyone, and like now he's like in the worship, and like I don't know,
Yeah,
it's just amazing to see what the Lord has been doing,
yeah.
like not only through me but through my brother.
I'm so glad that y'all
Yeah,
started coming. Y'all literally fit like perfectly with
I
us.
know.
Like as
Yeah.
soon as y'all came, I remember the first day. It was like I think it was here the first time I saw you,
Yeah.
and I was like, she's so cool. Like I want to be friends with her.
Thank
Like she's
you.
so cool.
No, yeah,
You're
at
just so
first I was
chill.
really nervous because, like, I had never really been in a setting like that because obviously, like, before, whenever I would go to those youth events, like, I knew everybody in the church.
Mm,
Like, we had all gone there, like, for years on end. So at this point, like, our families grew up with each other.
yeah.
So, like, whenever we went to church and whenever I was around all those people, like, I knew all of them. So I didn't feel uncomfortable or, like, out of place.
Right.
Whereas now that I was kind of older and was like in a whole different environment with people that I didn't know,
Yeah.
it was like a really not hard adjustment, but it was definitely
Like
a transition.
nerve-wracking.
Yes.
Yeah, like
Cause then it's like,
scary.
okay, these are all kids my age, like, and like they all strive to have the same thing as me. But then in the back of my head, there was also kind of that doubt of like, are they really all here for the
Yeah.
same things? And then obviously over time and like with every youth that I started coming to, I was like, no, yeah, these people are definitely aligning with what I want to do, you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I definitely started to enjoy all the Thursdays. And I feel like throughout every week, like the Lord just like has been working through me. And honestly, like the fact that we even have that little group is such a blessing because a year prior to even like moving churches and all of that, I was going through a really, really hard transition in my life. And I don't know if we're gonna start the talk like this, but
We could might as well. The
um
spirit's moving that way,
I
then
guess.
hey, let it be.
So, kind of a little bit about my testimony. So, high school was really, really rough. Like, when I'm telling you the spirit, like, the enemy was trying to get me as far from the Lord as possible. And, like, obviously at the time, I didn't recognize it like I do now.
Mhm.
Obviously, when you're in school, you're surrounded by a lot of influence,
Yeah.
especially because
Yeah.
the culture is like just shoved down your throat.
Yeah.
And like, if you aren't like this, or you don't follow this, or you don't dress like this, you're not cool.
Yeah.
So then, obviously, like, you're not really focused on aligning with God's will. You're like, I want to be cool for these people, you know? And so, for the longest, I kind of let myself, I don't know, kind of be carried by the culture and like what everybody else said.
Yeah.
And that literally ended up being the worst decision of my life, let me tell you,
Oh,
because
oh.
that led me down the worst addiction of my life. Let me tell you.
Aw.
Like when I like just got to a point where like my life felt like a routine. Like whenever I went to church, like I just didn't feel anything. I kind of just went to please my parents, to be honest, just so that they were like, "Oh yeah, my daughter goes to church," you know?
Mm.
When in reality is like after Sunday was over, like it was just like life was back to normal, back to doing whatever I wanted. And then like obviously you're in high school, you start to meet a lot of people and I got
Mhm.
involved with a lot of things that I shouldn't have gotten involved with, and it led to an addiction. Like I resorted to smoking all the time. Like it got to a point where like at that point I was just using it to cope with things that had been going on in my life.
Mhm.
And it took so much for me to step out of that because obviously like I had grown up going to church and like all of that. So it was like, who was I really going to go and tell about stuff like this, you know?
Mm.
Especially because in the church there's kind of like this stereotype of like you have to be perfect and like
Yeah.
you can't cuss, you can't do this, that, when in reality us Christians are not perfect at all. Like
Right.
we are struggling just as much as everybody else,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And like if not even more because the enemy is just constantly
Exactly.
attacking your life, you know?
Exactly.
And so I don't know, I was just kind of like in a really weird spot in my life and was like not relying on the Lord at all. And then just one day out of nowhere, like, well, not to get too in depth, right? But basically one day I had went to work. I had ran out of stuff to smoke basically. At that point my body had just gotten so used to like having that in my system that I remember it was like COVID was just like kind of dying down. And so I was at work. I didn't feel good because obviously I didn't have it in my system and I threw up. They sent me home because they were like, "Girl, what if you have COVID?" And I remember I got sent home and I was like, "Oh my." And like the person who would usually give me stuff worked with me. So I was like,
Oh.
obviously, like I can't work for 2 weeks now because they think I have COVID.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, like if I didn't have anything before, now I really don't have anything, you know? So I was kind of in like this spot where I was like, I'm stuck. Like cause like
Mm.
I don't have a car to drive to work or like, there's just no way I can physically get anything. And that was the moment I realized like without weed, what am I doing? Like my life just has no purpose. Like at this point, I'm just living, like I'm not even
Yeah.
really living
Yeah.
if that, cuz like it was just like a routine every day. I would just wake up, go to school, go to work, go to sleep, and then on Sundays I'll go to church. So it's like
Yeah.
a routine. And then when all of that kind of started happening, the Lord was giving me conviction over it. Because obviously, like, I started to sober up, the Lord was convicting me. And so at that point, like, I felt like I had bottled up so much emotion that, like, it was all coming to the surface. Everything that I had been, like, kind of suppressing was coming to the surface. And so me, whenever I feel really overwhelmed or even when I'm really mad, I don't know how to handle all that emotion. And I cry. Like I just let it out
Yeah.
in tears,
Just
you know?
overwhelmed.
So then it got to a point where like I was sobering up and I was trying so hard to keep it to myself. And like I was like, God, you know what? Like I can do this by myself. And oh, now looking back on it, I'm like, Sarah, no, you could not. Like it's crazy to think that I actually thought I could do it by myself. It's like, no, girl.
Yeah.
Because then like all the emotions started to resurface and like I would wake
Mm.
up crying, go to school crying, leave school crying,
Yeah.
get home crying. And so at that point like my eyes started to get swollen. My mom's going to start to realize something's up, you know?
Yeah.
The Lord was convicting me. He's like, I need you to confess what you're doing in your life. So I'm like, Lord, I don't want to tell
Like,
my mom
are
this.
you sure?
Like,
Is
I'm
this the
like,
devil?
Lord, I grew up going to church my whole life. You think I'm going to tell my mom that I've been smoked? Like, come on now. The Lord
Yeah.
just keeps convicting me. And then at one point, my parents go out to eat with like a couple other members from the church. And I remember I was home by myself. I don't
Uh-oh.
remember where my siblings were, but this night I'm bawling my eyes out. I'm in the middle of worship. I'm like, Lord, I feel this conviction over my life. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know like how to get this anxiety off me. Like I had been kind of like in prayer for a couple of days now. And the Lord just kept telling me, like, you need to tell somebody. You need, and I was trying so hard to not like listen to that or be like, no, Lord, that's
Like
not
just
you.
brush it
And
off.
then eventually I just like just didn't feel okay. And I called my mom, I was like, Mom, like I don't feel all right, this, that, and third. She's like, all right, I'll be home in a little bit. So whatever, she gets home and I'm thinking she's gonna hug me or be like, oh, like you're gonna be okay. She walks into my room, she's like, hey, like, is everything okay? Like I feel like there's something you're not telling me, you know, like, I know that something's been going on recently, you know, I feel like you're hiding something from me. The Lord is
Wow.
convicted. I'm like, you know
Wow.
what? I'm like, Lord, I get it. I get what you want me to do. So I'm like, at that point, I just tell her. I'm like, you know what, Mom, like, I've been doing this, this, and this. And it wasn't for like a couple of weeks. I'm talking about like months on end that I was waking up every day to smoke. And then like smoke before I ate, smoke before I went to like what kind of life even is that, you know?
Yeah.
And so at that point, I started confessing. I started telling her all of it. I'm like, no, I've been doing this, this, and this. And the whole time I didn't want to tell her because I was ashamed of it and felt
Yeah.
like, oh, she's going to be so disappointed. Like, I don't know, she's going to get mad. She's going to yell at me. And her reaction was the entire opposite. She just like kind of broke down and was like, I'm so sorry that I haven't been there for you. I'm
Wow.
so sorry if you felt like you had to turn to that because you didn't have me to rely on. And yeah, I felt guilty because I was like,
Yeah.
there's no way that I was sitting here relying on this when I could have at least even been relying on my mom, you know, like,
Yeah.
and told her, like, hey, this and this is going on, or like, hey, this and this is bothering me, you know?
Yeah.
But instead, I just chose to keep it to myself and felt like, oh no, like, the way that I'm handling it is better. But no, then after that, like, the Lord just genuinely started working in my life. Like, when I'm telling you, like before that, I never really talked to my mom about anything, or like I didn't really talk to my dad about anything. I was really kind of like secluded from everyone. I kind of just went to my room, minded my own business.
Yeah.
And then after that, every like the dynamic of my family changed entirely. Like
Wow.
my mom was like, "How are y'all doing? Are y'all okay?" Like she was like, I don't know, like
Like more
really
involved,
supportive,
kind
you know?
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like even after that, like I felt a lot more comfortable to come to her with things that before I would have never told her. Like, cause then at that point, like I had gone to an age where I could talk to her about boys and stuff like that. And like it wasn't weird anymore, you know? Cause like, girl, we just went through this together, you know? Like how
Yeah.
is this conversation gonna be weird,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But like then like after that was when my walk with the Lord really kind of started. You know, that was whenever it kind of clicked in my head, like, you know what, Lord, I realized like I cannot do this without you. Because when
Mhm.
I'm telling you, like, the Lord took me out of like the darkest spot I was ever in, like, it's actually crazy. Because I look back on it, I'm like, Sarah, it's you could not have done that by yourself, bro. Like, you
Yeah.
cannot sit there and take the credit for all that. Like,
Yeah.
literally, I acknowledge that it was the Lord's hand throughout all of it, you know?
Yeah. No, it's crazy too how like the Lord uses those kind of situations and turns it to good. Like,
Yeah.
especially like when you've like you're saying, like you grew up in church, like I'm sure you've already like given your heart to the Lord and accepted Jesus in your heart, and He's like, you're mine. And even though like you have gone down this path where it's like not doing the things maybe that you should have been doing as a believer, like He still uses that for something
Yes.
good, and like He like used that in your personal life to like change a family dynamic, which is really
Yes.
important. And I think that the enemy tries really hard to break family dynamics. I mean, personally, I've just seen it how he causes division, he causes separation, he causes trust issues, whatever. And it's like, God used this situation, even though maybe it wasn't something that was the best thing to be going on. Well, when it came to the end of it, like something beautiful was made
No,
out of it,
yeah.
you know?
And like I don't know, now looking back on the whole process, it's like now something that I just thank him for, and like I use it to glorify him, because I'm like, Lord, I acknowledge that I did not get myself out of that situation. I acknowledge that I did not get myself out of that addiction. Like
Yeah.
I was trying so hard to keep it to myself, and like, no, like if I just do it like a escondidas, nobody will know. But
Like
it's
it's
like,
not gonna hurt anyone
yeah, and
else
that's the
because
thing,
only I
no,
know
yeah.
about it.
And that was my mentality. I was like, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just me. Like it's not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
But in reality, like it really was.
Yeah.
And another thing is like I feel like our walk is very important for other people as well, because a lot of the times like you never know who you could reach. Like once you actually start your walk, like after I genuinely started to take the Lord seriously and was like, all right, Lord, like I get that I need to start a relationship with you. I get that I need to start praying, reading my word, and like all of that. Once I was like, Lord, I'm here to take you seriously, like he started showing up for me in so many different ways. And
Yeah.
like before I used to be so ashamed to tell people like, oh yeah, like I used to smoke, or like I used to do this, that. Because like first of all, people I feel like are really judgmental over Christians, right?
Yeah.
Because then they're like, "Oh, well, you're Christian. How is it that you're doing this?" Or "You're
Yes.
Christian. How is it that you did that?"
Yeah.
Or like sometimes they hold what you did in the past over your head. Like,
Yeah.
weren't you a smoker? Weren't you? And it's
Yeah.
like, bruh, if only you knew the work was doing, like the work that the Lord is doing within me.
Right.
Like, and that's the thing. A lot of people like judge you based off what they know, and
Yeah.
like that's why for the longest I was really ashamed, because I was like, bruh, how is it that I'm sitting here claiming to be a Christian
Mm.
and like was doing all that?
Yeah.
And like at first I was really ashamed of it. And then like when I started coming to youth here, I remember there was one time where at your house actually, we were here in the living room and I don't know what we were talking about. For some reason the Holy Spirit was just like, speak up, tell your testimony. Because I think Bryson had told a little bit of his testimony,
Yeah.
and the Lord was like, hey, you need to speak up. Like someone in this room needs to hear what like you went through.
Yeah.
So I kind of started talking a little bit about like the smoking aspect and how I was using it to cope with stuff. And then later that night, someone approached me. Keep in mind, I wasn't really comfortable with a group like that yet. Like I was kind of just chilling by myself on the couch. And this person approached me and they were like, "Oh, like I'm really glad that you shared that with the group. I was kind of going through a similar situation not too long ago, and hearing you like talk about what the Lord has been doing in your life really encouraged me to just keep going on with my
That's
walk."
awesome.
Obviously, in the moment, I was like, "Oh, thank you." Like when
Yeah.
I got home, bruh, I broke down because I was like,
Yeah.
Lord, this thing that I was so ashamed of is encouraging people to follow you. And I
Yeah.
was like, never in my life did I think that like the Lord could use a story like that to
Right.
encourage people.
Right.
And like, I don't know, the way that the Lord just works in people's lives is
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah.
I don't
And He
know.
can use
Yeah,
anything.
anything.
Anything. And this is something we talked not too long ago about was like being able to like confess what you think you're ashamed of to like bless the
Yeah.
lives of other people, because like you don't know what they've gone through, what they're going through
No,
that you
yeah.
have, that like your specific personal experience is what's going to specifically
No,
speak to
yeah.
them.
No, yeah.
I
My
think
mom used
that's
to tell me
wild.
that all the time, because obviously when you're in the middle of it, like, well, why is this happening to me? Like,
Mhm.
obviously, it's not going to be an enjoyable process because
Right.
obviously, if the Lord tells you, Azaria, you're going to go through all these trials and tribulations before you get to the good part, you're going to be like, Lord, I don't want to do that. Like, why would, obviously, He's not going to tell you step by step what He's doing in your life.
Yeah.
That's where faith kicks in. He's like,
Yeah.
all right, I need you to trust that I'm the God who has your life under control, that
Mhm.
I have everything sorted out for your life. And
Exactly.
like, I feel like a lot of the times we feel like, oh, but what if I don't make the right choice? Like, what if I was supposed to do this and God really wanted me to do, like, I promise you, you will not be able to ruin God's plans for you. Like, the way that God works is so, like, I don't even, it's, I can't even put it into words. Like,
Yeah.
you trust me, you will not be able to ruin the plan that God has for your
Mhm.
life because He is
Mhm.
so big and His, like, trust me, like, I I don't know. I'm sitting
I
here
know. Explain
choking
it, but
up,
like,
bro.
just
Like
trust me.
literally, I just trust me. Like I'm sitting here just choking up thinking about it. You know, like
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of times we're like, Lord, well, tell me what you're gonna do in my life. But it's like you're not gonna trust until He tells you. It's like,
Mhm.
but what kind of trust is that? You know? It's
Right.
like I want you to put your trust in me first, and then I'll show you. I
Yeah.
want you to walk with me even when you're in the unknown, even when you don't know
Yeah.
what's gonna happen next,
Yeah.
or like where I'm gonna take you. You know? Because like at that point, it's like you know the story. It's not exciting at all, you
Right.
know? Like
Right.
obviously he wants to be the one like moving your life, you know?
Yes.
Cuz then if you
Yes.
do it, you end up doing what you think is best. And how many times have we looked back on things that we prayed for and we're like, "Lord, thank you so much because you
Yep.
didn't give me that," you know?
Yep.
And like if we would have been just like living how we want, we base everything off of our feelings. And at the end of the day, our heart is deceiving, you know, like our feelings are
Right.
deceiving. And so that's why we don't guide ourselves by what we see. We guide ourselves by faith, you know. He talks about walking by faith, you know.
Right.
And so that includes not being guided by what you see, which I feel like a lot of times is really hard,
Yeah.
especially like in the world we live in when it's really materialistic and the
Yeah.
culture is telling you you have to dress a certain way or the beauty standard is telling you you have to look a certain way. You know, like
Mhm.
stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so I feel like the enemy has definitely done a good job of corrupting people's brains because
Yeah.
honestly like I think about all the stuff that I was consuming while I was in high school and like the music you listen to, the friends you're surrounded by, all of those things genuinely do matter cuz like once I started like my walk with the Lord and kind of started taking him seriously, you know, which was what like 2 years ago. um like I started changing like the music that I was listening to. I started listening to more worship and more gospel and stuff like that, you know? And then like I started listening to more sermons instead of just scrolling on TikTok. And so then I started realizing that my mentality was just changing entirely. Like before I had come to Christ and really been renewed, I didn't feel like I was worthy or I didn't feel I don't know, like there's just so many negative feelings that I had felt throughout my life that I was kind of just like, you know what, I'm accepting that this is what it is and this is how I'm gonna live. But
Mhm.
it's like once you come to the Lord and He renews your life and genuinely does something like, cause like I mean, a lot of people could sit here and listen to my testimony and be like, "Oh, okay." But it's like once you really live through it,
Yeah.
it's entirely different and it
Yeah.
changes your perspective. And so before, I felt like the enemy had a really good grip on me and like kind of had me really like self-conscious and had me doubt
Mhm.
myself and like who am I really, you know? Cuz I wasn't really firm in the word or who I was, you know? And then once I really started coming to the Lord, slowly He started to build my character and give me identity, you know?
Yeah.
And so now I feel like I just cope with things so much more differently. I mean, obviously, but like, I don't know, just the way that I perceive things now is so much different. Cause before, like, any slight inconvenience, like, I would have just gotten so upset. Like, all of a sudden, I'm just in a horrible mood. Like, I'm just so sad and crying. Whereas now I'm like, it was really not that deep. You know, like it's not that deep. I don't know. Like I feel like the Lord has just kind of like told me like a lot of the things that you worry about are not as big as you make them seem, you know?
Yeah.
Like you're just stressing yourself out for no reason.
Yeah.
But it's like once you just constantly start to place your faith in the Lord, I feel like everything just starts to change,
Mhm.
especially after He showed up time and time and time and time
Mhm.
and time again.
Mhm.
Like it's kind of hard not to say and be like, all right, Lord, maybe you do got this under control, you know? Because
Yeah.
like in the Bible it talks about how like, for example, uh when what is it? I think it's the prophets when they're on the boat and they see Jesus walking on the
The
water. Oh,
disciples.
the disciples, that's what it's called.
Disciples.
When they see him walking on the water, they immediately freak out and they're like, "Yo, like who is that?" You know,
Like
like
it's
they're
a
like they
ghost.
think it's a ghost.
Yeah.
And then Jesus like, "Yo, it's literally me," you know? And so at first they're just full of doubt. And they're like, "Who is that?" But it's like once they realize it's the Lord, they're like, "Oh, okay, like I get that it's you." But it's like a lot of the times we're like that because we're basing things off of what we see. So obviously the first thing they saw is something they didn't recognize and they were frightened by it. And that's what happens with us a lot of the times is
Mm.
something comes into our life or something happens and we don't know what to do and we're like, "Well, Lord, like we start to freak out and he's like, "Bruh, like
I'm right here.
I'm
I
right
have
here."
it. I'm
Like
holding it for
you get
you.
what I'm
Like,
saying? It's just
yeah,
like,
I got the
"Bruh, like
situation in my hands.
what are you tripping for?" You
Yeah.
know? And then even after the like whatever it is happens, you look back on it and you're like, "Bruh, I really was tripping for no reason." Like at the end of the day, God really did have control in it.
Yeah.
Like all the everything ends up working for our good, you know?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
nothing
I
can
think
really
that's why
harm
you
us.
can't ruin the plans of God is
Yeah.
because like he literally says like as long as you love him, his plans that are for good are gonna complete in your life.
No, yeah.
That's in Romans 8:26. And so like that's why we can't mess up the Lord's plans, especially when you love him. He's gonna make sure his plans come to fulfill no
No,
matter
yeah.
what. And then that's why he just asks us to have faith because he's like, as long as you have faith, like I'm gonna complete the good works in
Yeah.
you. Like it's not gonna be complete
Literally.
until the day I come back, anyways. Like I don't know. I
Yeah.
think it's beautiful, and that's why like faith is such an important part of our journey. Like even in your testimony, like if you wouldn't have taken that faith jump of like confessing your sin that you were indulging in, it's like, well, then what would have happened? Like,
Yeah.
then maybe it would have been like years down the road where it would have been harder to leave that because you would have
Yeah.
like been building it up for years, or like we don't
No,
know the
yeah.
consequences to like not stepping out in faith. So stepping out in faith is always going to be better, even though it may seem scary,
No,
it
yeah.
may seem worrisome. Like it's always going to be better than like not taking that faith
Yeah,
jump,
then just
you
not
know?
moving at all. And then
Yeah.
I feel like once you really start to incorporate faith in your life and like in your prayer, I feel like a lot starts to change, you know? Because then, like, I was gonna say something and my mind just went blank. Girl, I was literally about to say something. What?
Oh, you were saying that when the Lord starts to
Oh,
work
I
in your
do
life.
remember now.
Okay.
Once you start to kind of incorporate faith into your prayer and stuff, like, I feel like I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase of like once your heart kind of, or not your heart, but your spirit kind of aligns with the Lord, your mind and your body kind of has to go with it, you know?
Yeah, for
It's kind
sure.
of like that. And like once you kind of start to align with His will, I feel like your heart kind of starts to desire what the Lord desires for you, you
Mhm.
know? Because
Mhm.
then, like, I don't know, you get into a point where like you're so not really, I wouldn't really say deep in the relationship, but like, I don't know, you just get to this level of understanding with the Lord that you're like, okay, I understand that you've set these rules for a certain reason and you
Mhm.
set them to protect me.
Mhm.
Like, even if my flesh tries to sit here and deceive me and be like, no, God established that so you couldn't enjoy it. Because a lot
Mhm.
of the times the enemy tries to tell us that.
Yeah.
Like, because one thing is like, when it came to smoking, it's like, I always swore I would never do drugs or I would never do that, you know? And it's like kind of ironic because I it's exactly what ended up happening, you know. But like the enemy was kind of trying to tell me like, oh, but what if you're like kind of missing out, you know? Like I mean, there's no harm in trying it just once. And that's the thing is like I thought it was just a one time thing and it was gonna get like be over with, you know.
Yeah.
And it turned into a whole addiction. That's why they're like, it's not just a little lie, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's not just counted as a little sin, you know?
Mhm.
Like all sin is
Mhm.
equal in the eyes of the Lord, you know?
Mhm.
That includes like not 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 really like I don't really know how you would word it. What does it say? Like to not have faith in him is counted as a sin or something like that? Or I don't know exactly how it was worded in the Bible, but it's something along those lines. It's like if you do stuff without faith, it's counted as sin because you're doing it without faith, you know?
Mhm.
Uh
Mhm.
but I don't know. I feel like once you start to like you're like, you know what, Lord, you kind of put your faith in him and start to allow him to have control over your life. I don't know, everything just
Yeah.
starts to fall into place and it doesn't even feel like you're going against his will. It feels like you're going with the flow, you
Right.
know?
Like you're
And
following
like,
his plans for your life.
yeah, and then even after anything like comes into your life, any trials or tribulations, you're like, you know what, Lord? I'm so planted in you that I know you got it. I don't even have to worry.
Yeah.
And it's like To some people, it may seem like, oh, you don't care. It's not that I don't care. It's that I know that the Lord has it under control, you
Right. So
know?
am I gonna
For real.
stress?
Yeah.
He's carrying the stress
Yeah.
for me, so I don't gotta carry it.
Yeah.
Like,
Literally. But yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I think faith is so important in everything, even including prayer. And I think I understand what you're trying to say about like
Doing things without
doing
faith.
things without faith is almost like a sin because even in the Bible, dang it, I don't remember what book it is. Is it in James where they were going to pray over a man who was possessed with a demon, and they were with Paul. There was Paul, and they didn't have enough, like they were praying that for the demon to get casted out, and they were rebuking it whatever in the name of Jesus, but they didn't have enough faith, and then the demon got onto them, that spirit, and then they ran out of the house like naked and scared because
Mm-hmm.
like it like came upon them. And like later on in the passage it was saying how like didn't really have their own faith, they were
Mm-hmm.
relying on Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can't, if you're not having your own faith in what you're praying and what you're saying, like it's not really gonna go
Yeah.
anywhere. It's not gonna do anything. And for them, like it didn't protect them, like
Yeah.
because they didn't really have faith that in what the Lord was gonna do, that the Lord was gonna be able to cast that demon out and that it
Oh
was gonna
yeah.
flee and like be gone from the whole room, from the place. But like instead, like it got touched onto them because they didn't really have that faith. I'm gonna have to like remember what scripture that is, where it's at. But yeah, and I thought that was pretty crazy when I read that because I was like, dang, like that shows that when you're not like praying with faith, like what is it going to really do? James chapter 2, and I'll start at verse 14. And it says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works.' You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, 'Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness.' And as he was called a friend of God, you see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab, the prostitute, justified by works when she was received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead."
That's good. That's good. And I
So,
like that because it ties to so much that the Bible talks about, like
yeah.
spirits of the fruit. Like it's
Right.
saying that like obviously if you don't have works to prove your faith, then it's like what kind of faith do you really have? And if you
Yeah.
can't separate your works from your faith, then it's like, and
Yeah.
it's like, bruh, that's just so crazy to me that it
Yeah.
just all kind of ties back together, you know?
Yeah, and to me, I remember like thinking when I read that, I was like, which I've heard that verse a lot, but when I was actually like just like thinking on it, I'm like, well, what does work mean? And it's like work is the action that you put to your faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm gonna sit here and be like, Lord, I have faith that I'm gonna get through college debt free, but I don't do a single application to a
Yeah.
scholarship, what
Or
works
the
am I
yeah.
doing stepping out into that faith that God, you are going to be the answer to these scholarships, and they're going to say yes, and they're going to give me all
Yes.
the money so that I can graduate debt
Yeah.
free, so like if we don't step out and take action on that faith, I think another version says probably action, because work and action is meaning the same thing in these verses. So if we're not taking actions and we're not taking steps in that faith, then it's just a thought. It's
No,
just
yeah.
saying you have faith, but it's just there. It's not actually faith with works,
Yeah, and
so
then
it's
you're
not going
not
to go
even
anywhere.
moving in the faith that you claim to have,
Yeah.
because in that case, like, I could be like, oh, I want all of my friends to be saved. But it's like, if I'm afraid to sit here and tell people I'm a Christian, how do you plan on doing? Like,
Yeah.
it's like if you're not sitting here moving, or at least like you kind of also have to do your part. You can't just expect
Right.
God to be like, you know what? I'm gonna just sit here and here's $1,000 on your doorstep so you can pay. Obviously, like stuff doesn't really work. Like, I
That'd be
mean,
nice.
the Lord has done stuff that's
Right.
like that.
Radical stuff
I'm
like
not
that.
saying that that's entirely off the table, but I mean,
Yeah.
being realistic here, like if you don't even have the faith of a mustard seed, it's not gonna happen, my boy. Like, and
Yeah.
like the Bible talks about faith of a mustard seed. Also, I like
Yes.
that the passage talked about Abraham, because we were talking earlier before the podcast had started, and I was telling you about how I had kind of been reading like in the Bible about like people who kind of had faith in the Lord, right? And for some reason, I hadn't thought of Abraham, right? And so today, while we were at church, I was kind of like praying, whatever. And then the Lord reminded me, like, hey, Abraham is the father of faith. I'm like, hmm. I'm like, thanks for the reminder. I'm like, I'm going to dig into that? So, not that long ago, like, I had just gone back from eating and I started kind of rereading Genesis a little. And so I got to Genesis 22nd, or chapter 22. Why did I say 22nd? What?
The
The
22nd
22nd
chapter
of
of Genesis.
and it talks about Abraham being tested. If you don't already know the backstory of Abraham, Abraham and Sarah are a couple, right? And they're
Mhm.
growing kind of old, and they want to have a child. They're like, Lord, I want to have a kid. Keep
Yep.
in mind though, they're kind of grown. It's kind of hard to sit here and say you
She
want to
was
have a
like in her
kid.
90s
Yeah,
now, but
well, it said that Abraham had him when he was 100.
yeah.
So it was like, bruh, your parents were old. But anyway, so um Abraham kind of steps out in faith with the Lord. Is like, you know what? I'm going to trust that you're going to give me a son, because the Lord promised him a son. So all this time is going by. Obviously, Abraham gets a little impatient, makes a couple
I think it
mistakes.
was
We're
like
not going to
40
get into.
years he waited. I think it was 40. I don't
Yeah,
really
but
remember.
remember, he got a little impatient and
Yes.
tried to have his own kid, but the Lord was like, that's not the one I sent you.
Yep.
But that's a different story for a different day. But anyways, the Lord finally gives him a son after all this time, and this is where we step into Genesis chapter 22, and it talks about Abraham's faith being tested. And it says, sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith and said, Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the island of Moriah, I think is how it's called. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. Verse 3 says, the next morning Abraham got up early.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself, pause. Because if God would have told, like, imagine you just waited all this time for a child, and then he's like, actually, I want you to sacrifice. Like, we would
Yeah.
have at least been like, hold up, God. Like, and like you were saying earlier, you would have been like, I would ask God for confirmation, or like, God.
Yes.
Abraham did not ask no questions,
Mm-mm.
was not in hesitation. He got up the next morning, he saddled his donkey, and took his two servants with him, along with his son Isaac.
Mm.
He then chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. Verse 4. On the third day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will be right back.
Mm-hmm.
And verse 5 is the verse that really got me, because
Mm.
I feel like we've all kind of read the story a handful of times. Like we all, for the most part, know the story pretty well. But as I was rereading this, right, I was like, Lord, well, why are you bringing this story to me? Like I feel like I've already heard this.
Yeah.
But what caught my attention was whenever I got to verse 5, and it says, the boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back.
Mm.
Like, so Abraham had enough faith to be like, hey, don't worry, we'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
After he just told you that was a sacrifice?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
and that kind of ties into the book, like when he starts talking about, or I don't know if it's in the book or in the videos on YouTube. I kind of get both of them confused because they're by the same person and they talk about the same things.
Yeah.
But he made a video on YouTube where he's talking about, what is it, crazy talk? No, not crazy talk. Faith talk. That, I don't know why I said crazy talk. It's faith talk. And it's like, obviously, like, you want what you're saying to align with what you like, you get what I'm saying? Like, obviously you can't sit here and claim to have faith, and then not have works. But it's like, if you have works, then you should also be speaking in faith, you know? You should
Yes.
also like know how to not be like, you know what, like, Lord, can you do? Nah, what do you mean, can you do this?
Mm-hmm.
Be like, Lord, if
Like you're
this is your
asking the
will,
Lord
like,
because you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's another thing people get confused. Is like when you're placing your faith in the Lord, you're like, all right, let's say for whatever reason, you're like, all right, Lord, I'm putting my faith in you that I want to start this business. Like, you're gonna give me the funds for it, the support, whatever. If it's not part of God's will, I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen. No matter
Mm-hmm.
how much you try and sit there and pray and convince yourself, if it's not part of God's will, it's not going to happen. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying. Like, when you're in prayer and you're like, all right, Lord, I'm bringing this to you as an idea. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, I want to see if, like, this is something that could be. Trust me, the Lord will give you confirmation over it. Like, all you
Right.
have to do is ask Him. But, like we said, it's the faith.
Yeah.
Do you have the faith for it to actually happen, you know? Are you actually placing your faith in the Lord to be like, all right, like if it doesn't go my way, like does the Lord have control over that? Like, you get what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, if things don't go our way, I feel like a lot of times we take that in such a wrong way. Like, Lord, like why didn't that work out? Like, I thought that's what you wanted me to be doing this, but it's like in reality, the Lord sees a lot farther than we do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
times what we desire isn't really like part of like the journey we're supposed to have, or like
Right.
part of the mission in which the Lord wants us to be a part of, you know? Because like obviously the Lord has a plan for each and every one of us. And if
Yeah.
you don't believe that, you should start believing it right now. Like when I'm telling you, like the second you come to the Lord and you're like, all right, Lord, and you just like acknowledge like I'm nothing without you. And then that's like kind of where the faith kicks in, you know? You're like, you know
Yep.
what, Lord, I acknowledge that you have control over everything in my life. And no
Mm-hmm.
matter what I do, like everything is gonna work out the way it's supposed to work out, you know,
Right.
because you're in control.
Right.
And so, like, whenever anything happens in our lives, it's just bringing it to the Lord. Like, you know, Lord, I don't understand why this is happening, or I don't understand while I'm in the like why this is happening to me, or
Yep.
why this is affecting my family,
Yep.
or but it's like you're not supposed to understand, because then what kind of trust are you putting in Him, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because like
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about earlier, if he's sitting there telling you step by step everything that's going to happen in your story, obviously you're not going to want to endure all the hard stuff. You're going to
Right.
be like, Lord, I don't want to
Or you're
do
already
that.
gonna know what it
Yeah,
is, and
and
so it's
it's
not
not
gonna
even
catch.
exciting.
Right.
Like you're not even getting like,
You're not gonna learn anything from
yeah,
it because you
you
already
basically
know
don't
what's
even
gonna
get
happen.
fulfillment out of life,
Yeah.
you know, because you know what's going to happen. So it's like, I don't know, like once you like start to place your faith in the Lord, I feel like everything starts to change, because at that point it's like, you know what, I'm not like guiding my life off how I feel and what I want and what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's what
Mm-hmm.
you want, Lord, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because then at that point, once you kind of start to align with His will, like I said, your mind, your physical, everything else
Mm-hmm.
has to follow your spirit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you're so planted in the Lord and you're just like, you know what, Lord, I trust you with everything I have, and you're placing your faith in Him and you're just so planted, bruh, then what can really move you? You know, like the Bible
Exactly.
talks about nothing being able to separate us from His love.
Yep.
So it's like if you are really planted and you really have the faith that you say you do, then what can really move you? You know?
Exactly. Yeah, I think you're 100% correct when you're saying that, like, especially through prayers where we're gonna like have to like speak out our faith because um, Abraham was also known as a friend of God,
Mm-hmm.
like a very close friend of God. And for us, like we are also God is supposed to be our friend. Like he's not just
Yeah.
supposed to be like this genie in a bottle that we're gonna rub and be like, okay, I'm on my third
Yeah.
wish. This is what I wish for. Like he's not a genie in a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
He is our friend, and that's why he wants us to speak in faith because he wants to see us and be like, "Do you trust me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I'm gonna give you this because you trusted me and you know that I can do this for you."
Mm-hmm.
But if we're just sitting there like, "Okay, I'm just wishing for this, Lord," like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not treating the Lord as a friend. That's
Well,
just
yeah,
using
prayer
him and
prayer
like,
without faith is a wish, basically.
right,
Yeah. Cause then it's like you're basically just asking God for things when He's like, bruh, like what do you mean? You know, like
yeah,
at that point you're like you said, He's just a genie in a bottle to you. But it's like, for example, one of the main things in which I was praying a lot was like kind of whenever my I guess my walk with the Lord kind of started to get more serious, which was I feel like last year. Cause last year in itself was a whole year, you know? It started up very rough for me. And so I was like, Lord, like I don't know how I'm gonna manage the rest of this year. Like I already feel like this first month, not even the first month, it was probably like the first week of the new year. Like I'm telling you, like it was hard. And so I was like, Lord, you know what? Like I want to just get back in my relationship with you. Like I want to stop focusing on everything that I've been focusing on this last year, you know? Like I want to do the inner work and I want you to just renew my life, you know? And so I kind of started taking the time to really like I don't know, get involved with the Lord, you know?
Yeah.
And so once I felt like I was kind of good, you know, I kind of started to look around and was like, "Well, my siblings need the Lord too, you know? Like I want my family to be involved with all this." So obviously whenever we moved to this church, like I said earlier, like it was just me at first, you know, coming to the youth. So obviously like um I don't know if you remember, but whenever we were having the youth and they'd be like, "Oh, prayer requests," I'd be like, "Oh, can we pray for my brother? Like I want my
Mm,
brother to start coming to youth and like
mm,
want to get more involved," because he was for the most part shut out and didn't really want to get involved in that setting again, because I get it. A lot of the times churches are what hurt us and not God, and people tend to blame God when in reality it was people who hurt you. It was a church
mhm,
who hurt you, but in reality, what did God do to you, you know?
mhm.
So like I feel like he kind of had that sort of concept. um so obviously, like, I'm like, Lord, like, I'm doing so good. I want the rest of my family to be doing good with this walk, you know?
Right,
So
right.
I kind of started to pray over my family, and it seemed like the more I prayed, the more they got away, the more like they were out in the
Mm.
world, and I was like, Lord, like, you know, I kind of started to doubt a little. I was like, well, Lord, why is it that before, when I didn't pray over my siblings, it felt like they were doing fine, and now that I'm really like pursuing this and want them
Mm,
to follow you and
mm,
want them to love you the same way that I love you, like
mm.
it's just not working out, you know?
Yeah.
And then it's kind of when I started reading this book, and that picture you had showed me, or you had sent me a picture um from the book. Oh, I don't know why it didn't pop up, cuz for some reason it deleted like all the chat that I had with you from before,
Oh, that's
I don't know.
crazy.
But basically it was saying something about how we were on the right track or something like that, you know? And so I had read that little part of the book while I was kind of going through that, you know? And I was like, Lord, I kind of just started to sit with that. I was like, you're kind of right. Like, why is it that right when I start to really be persistent and consistent with like this prayer and praying over my family, like, why is it that
Oh,
all of
it
a
was said,
sudden,
I remember what it said. It said, some of the obstacles you are facing right now
are
are
proof that,
evidence and
yeah, that you're
proof
on the
that
right track?
in the right you're in the
Yeah,
right
like in
track,
the right
basically.
direction,
You're in the right
something
direction.
along those
Yeah.
lines.
No, you're right where you're supposed to
Yeah,
be.
yeah, that's exactly. No, and so I was like, Lord, well, why is it that right when I'm sitting here like being consistent with my prayer and like praying over my family, that it
Mhm.
feels like things are getting worse? Because then at that point, like the dynamic had been kind of good ever since the whole incident with me, but then like it transitioned over to my sister. Like yeah, a whole bunch of stuff started happening in my sister's lives, and like it got to the point where like my mom was getting called to school, and so at that point I was like, Lord, like, all right, you did it for me. Like, I want you to do it for her, you know?
Yeah.
Because like my brother's a little older, you know, like he's a little more self-aware. Like obviously, like if it's a relationship with the Lord, then I know you're well aware of who God is. And like
Mhm.
I know that no matter how much I try and sit there and kind of push you, like that's on you, you know?
Yeah, because it's
Whereas
that person's personal
yeah,
relationship with the
yeah. I mean,
Lord.
cause yeah, it is a personal relationship with the Lord. But my brother's a little older. He can kind of get what's going on, you know. So I'm like, I mean, if you choose to not walk with him, that's on you. You're a bit older, you know. But like my sister, she's a lot younger than us, and she's a lot more easily influenced, I guess. So I was like,
Yeah.
obviously, I want to be a good older sister and be a good influence to her, you know, and like be able to kind of minister to her in a way, you know. And so obviously it broke my heart to see that like the more I tried, it seemed like the more she was getting away, or like the more the enemy was just gripping his tight like his grasp on her, you know?
Mhm.
And at that point, like I feel like he kind of used that situation with my sister to kind of plant us in our faith. Because then not only was it just me praying over her, it was my mom, it was my dad, and then even my brother like recognized like, all right, like something's not okay, you know, like we need to start praying over this. And so once we kind of like put it in the Lord's hand, like you're saying, sometimes he does use situations that are very unfortunate to get us to come to him, to get
Mhm.
us to get closer to him, to
Mhm.
be like, you know what, Lord, I was straying away from you, and like we
Mhm.
weren't placing our faith in you. We
Mhm.
weren't putting our trust in you. Because then at that point, like, it was like, I don't know if at that point we just were like, okay, well, this is as bad as it can get. And we're just like, okay. When in reality, it's like, nah, bruh. Like, a lot of the times, things like that happen behind closed doors,
Yeah.
And obviously, like I said, me and my siblings grew up going to church, so I totally get it when it comes to being shamed, like, or being embarrassed when it comes to sin, because then it's like you grew up kind of having this image built of you, where it's like, oh, you and your family went to church, like
Mhm.
you and your family are good and y'all are holy, y'all are saints. When in reality is like my family struggles with some of the problems that you and your family face
Right.
through,
Right.
it's like just because me and my family have been on a walk with the Lord doesn't mean we don't get tempted, or we don't fall into sin, or we
Yeah.
don't make mistakes, or
Yeah.
it's like I feel like people just have this like image of like, oh, Christians are supposed to be perfect, when in reality it's the exact opposite. You're
Yeah.
supposed to recognize how imperfect you are and how much you need the Lord
Yeah.
to redeem everything that you like, because like the sin is what corrupts us,
Yep.
so it's like our spirit could long for the Lord, but physically, like, like your body just wants something else. So I don't know, like it's just a matter of genuinely grounding yourself to the Lord, and
Yeah.
like, because once you genuinely do and the enemy starts to see like, okay, like she's genuinely taking this that's when they start to come for you. And that's when I
Mhm.
realized like
Mhm.
the enemy's trying to push harder because he realizes what's going on. I'm being
Right.
consistent with my prayer. He sees how much faith I'm putting in, and like it's crazy how much like the Lord has just worked through my family. It's like insane to think the spot we were in 2 years ago to where we are now. And like
Mhm.
honestly, looking back on it now, like I'm so glad I grew up going to church, which like obviously growing up I was like, well, why do I have to do this every Sunday? Why do I have to be here every Wednesday? Like obviously as a kid you don't understand. But once
Yes.
the Lord does the work in your life and gives you revelation over who he is and the love he has for your life, like it changes your life entirely and the
Yeah.
perspective you have of life entirely, And so I remember like whenever I had first went through all of that, we were still going to the other church. And at the time the church was getting kind of busy, it was getting kind of crowded. And I remember like in the middle of prayer, the Lord told me, um, you're gonna go to a new building. So me in my head, I'm thinking like, all right, my church is gonna grow so big, we're gonna have to move. So I remember telling my dad like, and I remember I only told my dad about it. I was like, Dad, like the Lord told me we're gonna move to a new building, and he was like, okay, and he kind of just like looked at me. He was like, all right, but I thought it was the church we were currently at. Little did I know, a whole year later, we were going to be at an entirely different church. He was like, I mean, I was telling you what was going to happen, but not in the way that you thought. And
Mm.
that's why a lot of the times, like, when the Lord, like, kind of gives us hints of what's going to happen, I mean, it could happen in an entirely different way than you
Mhm.
expect it to happen.
Mhm.
And that's why, like, you put your trust and your faith in him, because if it's really meant to happen, it'll happen one way or another.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's a matter of God's timing,
Yeah.
because I feel like a lot of the times we're really impatient when it
Yeah.
comes to blessings and like milestones and things like that are supposed to happen in our lives, when the Lord is like, bruh, I'm molding your character right now. You're in the middle of a season in which you need to be molded. You need to like get character, for this
Yeah.
next season. And like once you're kind of like, you know what, Lord, I'm gonna do things to honor you in private, he starts to honor you in public.
Right.
He starts
Exactly.
to show people
Exactly.
in public, like, you know what, this is someone who truly loves me, this is someone who truly believes in my word you know and like honestly, bro, like I like now looking back on everything that I went through my whole life, I'm like, Lord, I thank you for all those experiences, whether they were pleasant or not. Like it
Mhm.
genuinely molded me into the person that I am today, and
Mhm.
I can't thank him enough for it. Obviously, in the moment, it wasn't very enjoyable.
Right.
But like now that I'm on the other side of things and I see like the work that God was doing behind closed doors, and like even when I didn't see it, I'm like, Lord, thank you, because there were certain prayers you didn't answer.
Yeah.
Thank you because there were certain doors you closed when I thought
Mhm.
that was the. It's like
Mhm.
stuff like that where it's like if it were up to me, my life would be entirely different, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like the Lord just works in mysterious ways.
Yeah, and I think that the more that you do pray and the more that you do press in, it's like the more clear his path gets to
Yeah.
you because you're pressing in hard and he's like, because you're actually pressing and you're pursuing me, I'm gonna feed you. I'm
No,
gonna give you
yeah.
this bread that you're wanting, this
Yeah.
water that you're thirsty for. Like, I'm gonna give it to you because you're pressing. Because I mean, I kind of talked about this in this last episode that was published. Like, if we're just gonna be like sluggish and just crave and desire, it's not gonna get anywhere. But it's when we're pursuing and that when we're like after it that it's gonna come to us and we're gonna be satisfied. Our soul is gonna be
Yeah.
satisfied.
Well, because there's obviously a difference between like, obviously like just receiving, and giving nothing back to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like there's a difference between being a believer and being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like we were talking about earlier, like the devil knows like who the Lord is. Them, the demons know who the Lord is. You know,
Yeah.
so anybody can believe in Him and know that He's real.
Yeah.
But it's an entirely different thing to live the Christian life because
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it is not easy. I'm not gonna sit here in front and be like, yeah, guys, ever since I turned to Jesus, like my life has been perfect. I have not sinned once. I have no, that is the entirely like opposite of what's been going on, you
Right.
know? The
Right.
enemy has been trying to tempt me, has been trying to
And
move me,
that's
has
in
been trying
Proverbs.
and
It
like,
says that the
yeah.
enemy knows the enemy doesn't want our relationship with the Lord to be successful, and
Hmm.
he tries to get in between our relationship with the Lord
Hmm.
by giving us seasons of tiredness, seasons of stress, and those things to try to further
Yeah.
us from the
And he
Lord.
and he probably thinks like, oh yeah, like this is gonna make her hate God or this is gonna push her away. When in reality is like all those trials and tribulations should be
Mhm.
pushing you closer. Should be like, Lord,
Mhm.
I don't understand why I'm in this season. I don't understand why I'm
Mhm.
going through this. I don't know what's gonna happen next, but I trust you. I trust that
Mhm.
my life is in your hands. I
Mhm.
trust that you will continue to be faithful because at the end of the day, when has the Lord ever let you down?
Mhm.
Never, or at least He's never let me down. And like, if you've claimed that He's let you down, I
Then
show
he's
you.
not finished with it
Yeah, he's
yet.
not
Like,
done
keep
with that.
waiting, keep
I'm telling
waiting.
you because
And I
it's
think that
like,
the more that you do pray in faith and the more that you have faith, the easier it becomes. And then the bigger you can have faith, which kind
yes.
of like what the book talks about crazy faith is like you start with a little faith. You
With
start
that
with the
baby
baby
faith, you
faith,
start with that
and then
baby
you
faith.
grow up to that crazy faith
Yes.
because you were able to like see him work in those little things. You're like, all right, I saw you work in that. I can see
Yeah.
you work in this. Okay, I
Yeah.
can see you work in that too. And so like the more that you do press and the more that you push through that awkwardness or like that fearfulness of like he can't do that. Like how would he make a way for that? Like
Hmm.
just believe that he can because that's what faith is believing in what you can't see. And so that's what we're called to walk by, what we're called to live by. And the more that you press in, the easier it's going to become
Yeah.
to do it, you know?
No, yeah. And a lot of the times, even I feel like we feel like things are too small for the Lord. We're like,
Mhm.
no, well, this is too insignificant. Like, no, God doesn't care, but He does care about that. He wants you to bring every little thing before Him and be like, Lord, well, what do I do about this? Or like just recently, I was talking to my dad and I was telling him about how I was praying over discernment over this certain situation, right? And how before, like, if I probably would have been put in that situation a year ago, my reaction to the situation would have been entirely different. I would have dove head in first, like, yeah, Lord, like, I'm gonna go for this, like, this is your will. I was like, you know what? I saw everything play out. I was like, you know what? Before I do anything or move or like make an action
Mhm.
or I'm gonna bring it to you. I was like,
Mhm.
even if it's something small, even if it's something insignificant, I'm gonna bring it to you.
Yeah.
And I was like, Lord, what do you want me to do in this situation?
Mhm.
Even if it's so small, your opinion matters to me, you know? And it matters to him that you bring all the little things and you care about his opinion on it, you know?
Yeah.
Because then it's like I said, like once you start to align with his will, everything else just follows and it just feels like you flow. It doesn't even feel like you're, because I don't know, like before I was really taking the Lord seriously, before whenever I was just doing my thing, waking up every day, just having my routines, you know? Like, I don't know. Like, I guess I don't really know how I would word this. Like before,
Like you feel like maybe you were trying to discover your own purpose for your own life or create your own purpose for your own life
no, I
or
guess, bro, my mind just keeps going blank because like I think of like I look at something and I just I'm like, ugh, I forget. Um, Man, what was I just talking
That
about?
before you were pursuing the Lord's will for your
Oh,
life.
before I was like actually pursuing like the Lord and was like, Lord, like what do you want for my life? I felt like anything I did just felt like it was so hard to do. Or I don't even
Mm.
know how to really put it into words. Like it just kind of felt like hard to move in, or like I couldn't really like,
Like you were hesitant
yeah, kind
to
of like you
do
were
it.
hesitant. Or even when I moved or like on the action, I was like kind of like iffy on it, like really uncertain, like kind of just like winging it, to say the
Mm.
least. Whereas with God is like you're like, all right, Lord, what do you want for my life? Because what I want for my life is entirely different than what you want.
Mm.
And so he kind of starts to place those desires in your heart. And then I don't know, like it just feels like you flow. You don't even como que no vas contra. I don't know how to
Like
describe
you're
it.
not
Like
going
you
against his
don't go
plan. You're
against
not
his
going
plan.
against,
Yeah, like it
yeah,
just feels like it is so easy. Like it's
yeah,
just flows.
yeah.
And like
Well, because
before it
then I
didn't
think
feel
you're
like that.
able to walk confidently because
Yeah.
then you know who's the author of your path.
Yeah.
Versus like when you don't know who's the author of your path, you're like, all right, I guess I'm gonna do this, but I
Yeah.
don't really know. Like, should I go do that?
Yeah.
But I don't know. And it's like, versus like now you're like, all right, I could
Yeah.
walk confident in this next step I'm gonna take because I know who goes before me, who goes behind me, and who's beside me.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. No,
yeah,
but yeah, I feel like the Lord has just definitely, or like especially throughout like these last couple weeks, because like obviously I knew that this podcast was coming up and that we were gonna be talking about faith. I
yeah,
was like, well, Lord, like what does it really mean to have faith?
yeah.
And so I kind of started doing my own little research, and I found this acronym that says faith is full assurance in the heart. And I was
Mm,
like, Lord, that's crazy, like full assurance in my heart. And then it reminded me of how the Bible talks about how we have to guard our hearts before anything.
mm,
And I'm like, bruh, like it's just so crazy how so much in the Bible just kind of ties back to each other. And
mm,
I'm like that's kind of what I was talking about earlier when I was saying like now I understand why you set these certain things in place,
mm,
and why you tell us certain things
mm,
to protect us, to
mm,
watch our heart, is not just, oh, like just watch your heart, just be careful. Nah, he's telling you
mm,
guard it with your
mm,
heart, because the enemy knows like the way to get to you. Because
mm,
like we were talking about a couple Sundays ago with Pastor Ender, and he was talking about obviously the enemy's not gonna show up to you in a disgusting form. He's gonna show up in your life in something pleasing, something that you're
mm,
like, ooh, that's tempting. And
mm,
that's why earlier I was saying the walk with Christ is not easy at all, because obviously the enemy knows like, okay, this person is being consistent, they're taking this seriously, so he's gonna try everything to derail you,
yeah,
to get you to like not stand with him.
yeah,
And so like temptation starts to get thrown your way, and then you're like, well, Lord, like, I don't know, you kind of just are like, should I go back? But then the Lord's like, I just freed you from that. Why would you go back?
yeah,
And there have been multiple times where like I was facing temptation, and the Lord's like, why do you keep going back to the same thing that I brought you out of?
mm,
Like, why do you keep running back to the same thing that time and time again has showed you doesn't bring fulfillment, doesn't
mm,
bring you joy, doesn't bring
mm,
you peace? But the second you bring yourself to your knees and start declaring the Lord that you serve, that's when the peace starts to come in, the joy starts to come
mm,
in. Everything else, it doesn't matter. It's just me and you, Lord. And so like he time and time again has showed me like I'm the one who provides the peace. I'm the one who provides the joy. So
yeah,
why do you keep going back?
yeah,
And like why do we keep going back? I sometimes I do sit back and wonder like why do I keep going back? But it's comfort. In reality,
mm,
it's comfort. Like the enemy wants us to get comfortable in something and
mm,
not want to leave. And that's
mm,
why like whenever I had first kind of quit smoking, which I don't even really want to say quit smoking, because like I had quit smoking to my parents, but even then, like last year, I was facing so much temptation. And like, I haven't really told anyone about it, but last year was such a crazy year between me and God. Like, when I'm telling you, the enemy was trying so hard to derail me and try to kind of like give God this bad rep, but he can't, because time and time again the Lord has showed up in my life and has proved to me like how faithful he's been in my life
mm.
and how good and how loving of a
I feel
God
like
he
that
is,
makes you want to be faithful to him more because
Literally,
it's like,
yes.
bro, like I have this friend that's just so loyal to me, and I keep turning my back against them,
Yes,
and then they're right there
yes.
to my face, like, I love
Or
you.
like,
I'm
I don't
still
know if
loyal
you
to
remember
you.
that one time that we were here in the middle of worship, or and then I think the worship had end, or I don't know if it was before the worship. I don't remember. I just remember it was like Stephanie's cousin was here or
Uh
somebody,
huh.
and then I was telling y'all about how sometimes it feels like we're the toxic person, you know. And let me
Yeah.
elaborate on that because whenever I first said that, everybody was like, "What are you talking about?" But it's like, for example, if you're dating your significant other, right? And you're constantly faithful to that person, but that person is constantly going behind your back, doing stuff that you don't like, things that you've told them, like, hey, I don't feel comfortable with you doing, and they just continuously go out and do it. Obviously, you're gonna feel some type of way. You're gonna be like, bro, you don't actually love me.
Yeah.
Like, you claim to love me, but your actions don't prove that.
Mhm.
But it's like, once that person does, like, they're like, they're kind of match you with that same energy. You're like, oh, like you are faithful, like
Mhm.
you are loyal to me.
Mhm.
And then it was kind of like that, and like sometimes whenever we look at, for example, toxic relationships, you look at the person who's giving the love. You're like,
Mhm.
why don't you leave him? Why don't you leave her? They're hurting you. They're this and that. And then that person's like, no, but I love them.
Mhm.
Sometimes I feel like it's like that with God. Like, there's so
Oof.
many times where we sit there, we disrespect him,
Yeah.
we deny him,
Yeah.
we're like, nah, like, or we just simply don't even want to spend time with him.
Yeah.
And the Lord is still there.
Mm.
He's still there loving us. He's
Mm.
still there with his grace. He's still there with his mercy. He's still
With
waking
his
you up
good
every
plans
day.
for us, even though you
Literally.
like over here
And so like whenever
turning your
I
back.
I, I was kind of like in prayer once, like all I could think about was like, Lord, the least I could do is live my life for you.
Mhm.
The least I could do is like spread the gospel. The least I could do is spread my testimony
Yeah.
and tell others of what you've done in my life and what you can do in their life,
Yeah.
because if he can do it in my life, he can definitely do it in somebody else's life. Like, you are not an exception. It doesn't matter like in what situation you
Mhm.
are and what
Mhm.
kind of sin you're dealing with. When I'm
Mhm.
telling you the Lord renews, he
Mhm.
renews and
Mhm.
restores in ways that nothing
And
else
he
can.
uses even like, okay, you're like, no, not me, I promise.
Yeah.
Like, nah, like he went to the people that other people consider dirty. Like
Yeah.
he went to the prostitutes, he went to the lame, the blind, like he went to the people that
Or
were
like David, bruh.
outcasted, the
He ended
people that
up
were by
being a king,
themselves.
but was taking
Yeah.
care of sheep.
Yeah.
And like, it's crazy. Like, the Lord went out and told him, like, hey, you're gonna, like, they told him, hey, you're gonna be king, just not yet. So all that time that he had to sit there and prepare for that,
Mhm.
that's why it's
Mhm.
like all those hard trials, they're not made for us to be like, Lord, why is this happening to me? Lord, I thought you loved me. Like, why are you letting this happen? Maybe he's letting it happen because he's trying to mold your character. Maybe
Mhm.
he's letting it happen because he wants you to turn to him. Maybe he's letting it happen for unknown reason, but
Cuz he
sooner or
wants you to have
later
faith.
sooner or later you're gonna realize why he let it happen.
Yeah.
Like, when I'm telling you no pain goes in vain,
Mhm.
like, the Lord uses all of
There's
that
purpose for your
for a
pain.
reason,
Purpose for
like,
your pain.
literally, yeah.
Yeah. Woof, girl. We got to have a
Bruh,
whole nother
for
episode,
real,
cuz.
we've been sitting here, bro. I'm already sweating, like, yo. No, but
No,
yeah,
but yeah, no, Sarah, thank you so much for like
of
sharing your
course.
testimony, for like being like stepping out in faith and just like sharing what faith is and like
Hmm.
what that looks like and like how we can do it even in our daily lives or from situations that we've been through, you know? I think it's really important, and um God wants to see this generation full of more faith.
Yes,
He wants to see us with crazy
yes,
faith. Like he doesn't want to see us with like this little baby faith or no faith. He wants to see you on your own faith, not depending on someone else's faith to get you through things. No, like stop asking for someone to like. Always good to ask for prayer. Don't stop asking for prayer,
yeah,
but don't
yeah,
only rely on someone else
yes,
to pray for your situation. Like no, you get on your knees and like proclaim and profess what the Lord's going to do, because he's going to do it through your faith, you know?
for real.
And then work on it. Do actions that are going to follow through with the faith and show him that like you're persistent and that you believe in it, and he's gonna do it. So
No, yeah. Or like, I like that you said that because a lot of the times I feel like, for example, we see other people praying, we're like, oh yeah, like they can do it, but I can't. I'm like, well, why do you think that you can't? Like, y'all both like believe in the same God. Like,
mhm.
what's the difference?
Mhm.
Just because you feel like he can't do it and you doesn't mean he can't. And like,
Mhm.
a lot of the times I feel like we're like, no, God, we're just too far from you. Like, no, like, like I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like in reality, you're a lot closer than you think you are. And the
Yeah.
enemy likes to make people feel like they're far and that, no, you're not good enough. No, you're not good enough to be used.
Yeah.
No, no, you can't. You're not nah, when in reality, it is you. It
Yeah.
is you who needs to be standing up and like taking that authority and being like, you know what? Like, I am who you say I am,
Yeah.
not what everybody else deems me to be.
Yeah.
And so that's when like when you start to talk in faith, when you start to walk in faith. And so like it just kind of starts to spread to every aspect of your life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, no, for real. I think I had that dependent type of faith, and I think that's why, like, I shared, don't just depend on someone else's faith and someone else's prayer to like be what it is that the only source that you're gonna have in the faith that you want something to happen.
Yeah.
Like, no, you can have that same faith, and the Lord can answer your prayer. Like, don't just leave it up to someone else, but
Hmm.
have that faith. Be confident that the Lord can do it, and He's gonna show you that He can do
Or
it.
like that kind of reminds me of like the people who are like sick and they're like, "Oh, can y'all pray for me?" Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like you said, there's nothing
Yes.
wrong with asking for prayer. But it's like do you recognize the authority that you have? Like I just realized the mic was super far. Do you recognize the authority that you have? Like to be like I cat like the Bible talks about how like if you like you can cast out demons, like
Mhm.
if you just simply have the faith to do so.
Mhm.
And like going back to like you were saying the story earlier, those people were relying on who was it, Paul's faith
Mhm.
to cast out the demon, and they were like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, like he's here with us, like we got it. But it's
Mhm.
like in reality, you weren't really believing,
Yeah.
you weren't really stepping out in faith,
Yeah.
believing that the Lord could do that,
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Sarah. I love you. You're such an amazing person. I'm sure everyone else loves you now that listen.
Hey, hey, I mean, what can I'm just kidding. I'm just
I'm
kidding.
so
I'm just
humble,
kidding.
so humble.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, and then for any of you guys who are listening, we both were reading crazy. Well, I was reading Crazy Faith, and it's a book by Micheal Todd. It's so good.
Yes.
And I remember I reached out to Sarah because she slid up on
I think it was like
a
a
post on my
poll or a post you made,
story,
yeah.
and she told me to read it, and I was like, oh wait, I
She's
have
like,
that
I'm
book,
actually
like
reading
I'm reading
it.
it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, we should do a podcast just around faith and like the book. And we didn't really get to touch too much on the
Yeah.
book, but that's good. Y'all go read
Yeah,
Crazy
y'all can go
Faith.
read it.
It's just a book that's more in depth about faith and how we can go from baby faith to just believing in the small things to having crazy faith to believe in the huge things that God can do in our lives, because God has the power to do so. And
Hmm.
just like He did all those things in the Bible, that's the same God that's with us today. Let me just remind you, like the
Literally.
God that gave authority in the staff of Moses to split the Red Sea, like that's the God that's with you. The God that gave a child to Abraham and Sarah after 40 years of waiting, that's the same God that can give you a baby. You that's struggling with infertility, like have faith, push through. The Lord can do it, and I promise you, His plans will always come to fulfill in your life. And I'm gonna stop because the Holy Spirit's
For
gonna like
real. We about to
make this
sit here all
podcast two
night, for
hours.
real.
So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining and tuning in, and stay tuned for the next episode that's to come. And pray for this podcast, pray for my friends, pray for me, and I'll be praying for you. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me,
Of
dude. It was such a
course.
privilege being here. Yeah, we didn't really talk too much about the book, but y'all should definitely go read it
Yes,
because whenever I was like reading it, I'm telling you, like, it definitely changes your perspective
it
on
changed
how
mine too.
you should like
Changed mine too.
pray or like kind of like manage your day to day life, kind of,
Yeah.
Because like walking with the Lord is an every day to day thing.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So no, thank you so much. I'm
Thank you
so
for
glad
having
I was
me.
able to have you on. Thank you guys all for joining and tuning in and listening. And stay tuned
Subscribe
for
and
next
watch.
Thursday.
Wait,
subscribe, like,
subscribe and
comment.
like the
And if
video.
you're on Spotify,
Yeah.
follow the channel. Y'all know all the things.
All right, bye.